9 things that don't make sense after 70. Imagine reaching a point in life where the things that once kept you up at night, the anxieties, the social pressures, the endless to-do lists, no longer hold any real weight. What if you discovered that the keys to true happiness have been within you all along, simply waiting for the right moment to be embraced? That moment is now. Turning 70 is not just about aging, it's about transformation. It's the shedding of old expectations, the release of burdens that no longer serve you, and the dawning of a new era where you live by your own rules. The things that once felt urgent, status, material possessions, and pleasing others, suddenly lose their grip, revealing what truly matters. And with this realization comes an incredible gift: freedom. But are you ready to let go? To free yourself from what no longer matters and step into a life of deeper peace, joy, and fulfillment? In this video, we'll explore 9 things that lose their significance after 70 and how releasing them can unlock a life of true contentment. Stay with us until the end, and if this resonates with you, subscribe, like, and share this with others walking this path. 1. Worrying about others' opinions. Lao Tzu, the ancient Chinese philosopher, once said in the Tao Te Ching, "Care about people's approval, and you will be their prisoner." This simple yet profound truth reminds us that the more we seek validation from others, the more we become shackled by their expectations. Socrates, too, was condemned by society for questioning conventional wisdom. Instead of bending to public pressure, he famously proclaimed, "The only true wisdom is in knowing you know nothing." He chose to stay true to his beliefs even when it cost him his life. These sages understood a lesson many of us take decades to grasp. True freedom comes when we stop letting the opinions of others dictate our choices. Now, let me share a story. One that will sound familiar to many of you because, in one way or another, we've all lived it. When Margaret was young, she learned the unspoken rules of society. Speak softly, don't challenge authority, and above all, make sure people like you. She followed them religiously. Her choices were rarely her own. Her clothes, her career, even her marriage were carefully curated to meet expectations. Her mother used to say, "What will the neighbors think?" before every big decision. And Margaret obeyed. She took a respectable job as a teacher, though her heart longed to be an artist. She married Tom, a man her family approved of even though he never really understood her. When she wanted to move to a different city, people whispered, "She's ungrateful. Why leave a good life behind?" So she stayed. Years turned into decades, the house filled with furniture she didn't love, and her walls displayed the paintings of famous artists, never her own. At 50, she caught herself staring into the mirror, wondering where the girl who once dreamed had gone. But even then, she told herself it was too late to change. Then came her 70th birthday. Her children, now grown, threw her a party. People she barely knew filled the house, speaking in polite tones, asking about her health, her hobbies. Nobody asked if she was happy, because that was never the question, was it? That night she sat alone in the dim light of her living room, looking at an empty canvas that had been gathering dust for years. And for the first time in her life she picked up a brush, not for approval, not for admiration, but simply because she wanted to. The paint glided across the canvas, a mix of bold reds and deep blues, colors she had never dared to wear. She painted until dawn, and as the first light touched her hands, she realized something with a painful clarity. She had spent 70 years living for others, but today she was finally living for herself. Margaret never looked back. She started painting every day, not for galleries or praise, but because it made her feel alive. She stopped going to events she didn't enjoy, stopped wearing clothes that didn't feel like her. The whispers of disapproval never fully disappeared, but she no longer cared. For the first time in her life, she was free. How much of your life have you spent pleasing others at the cost of your own happiness? Have you ever felt like Margaret, trapped by expectations? Now, ask yourself, what would you do today if no one was watching? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your experiences in the comments below. Let's start a conversation about living authentically before it's too late. 2. Accumulating material possessions. The great Stoic philosopher Seneca once wrote, "It is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more that is poor." The pursuit of possessions, he argued, does not lead to happiness, but to an endless cycle of wanting. Buddha also taught that attachment is the root of suffering. He told the story of a wealthy man who hoarded gold, fearing he would lose it. In the end, his wealth did not bring him peace. It only made him more anxious. True freedom, Buddha taught, comes from letting go. But what does this mean for us today? Let me tell you a story. Harold never thought he'd grow old. No one really does. He spent his younger years chasing what he thought mattered: a bigger house, a nicer car, a closet full of tailored suits. His job paid well, and every raise meant another addition to his home: a new dining set, a bigger TV, expensive art pieces. He believed each purchase was proof of his success. His wife Eleanor used to tell him, "We don't need all this, Harold. We need more time together." But Harold was too busy, too focused on building a future where they'd finally relax. Then Eleanor got sick. It happened so fast. One day she was there, laughing, drinking tea by the fireplace. The next, she was gone. Just like that, Harold's big house suddenly felt unbearably empty. The things he once treasured, the luxury car, the imported rugs, the antique cabinet, felt meaningless. They didn't hug him when he was lonely. They didn't share stories over dinner. They didn't love him back. In one evening, Harold sat in his grand living room, surrounded by the echoes of a life spent accumulating. He ran his hand over Eleanor's favorite chair, still perfectly preserved, untouched. He hadn't let anyone sit there. It felt disrespectful, as if keeping the house exactly as it was would somehow keep her with him. But then he realized she was never in the things. She was in the memories, in the love they shared, and those would stay with him no matter what. The next morning, Harold did something he never thought he'd do. He began letting go. He donated the expensive suits he no longer wore. He gave away the furniture that only collected dust. He sold the car that sat unused in the garage. As each item left his house, he felt lighter, freer. The space that once felt suffocating now felt open, welcoming. With the money he made from selling his things, he took his grandchildren on a trip, something Eleanor always wanted to do. They laughed, they talked, they created new memories, and for the first time in years, Harold felt something he had long forgotten: peace. Harold learned too late that possessions mean nothing if they come at the cost of love and time. But you don't have to wait until it's too late. Look around your home. Are you holding on to things that no longer serve you? What truly brings you joy, your belongings or the people in your life? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your reflections in the comments below. Let's talk about what truly matters. 3. Social obligations that bring no joy. Confucius once said, "Associate with those who help you become your best self." He believed that the people we surround ourselves with influence our thoughts, emotions, and choices. A life filled with superficial relationships and empty obligations is a life half-lived. Similarly, the Greek philosopher Epicurus taught that the company of just a few true friends is far more valuable than a room full of acquaintances. He argued that joy comes not from attending every gathering, but from choosing relationships that nourish the soul. Now let me share a story, one that might sound familiar to many of you. Walter had spent his entire life being agreeable. His mother had taught him that good manners meant saying yes to every invitation, every request, every expectation, even when he didn't want to. By the time he was in his 70s, Walter had perfected the art of small talk, handshakes, and polite smiles. He attended parties where conversations felt forced, stayed in friendships long past their warmth, and spent holidays with relatives who barely knew him. It was just the way things were. One Sunday afternoon he received yet another invitation, a gathering at a cousin's house. The same cousin who only called when he needed something, the same crowd of people who spoke over him, never listening, never caring. He sighed and set the card on the kitchen table. It was just another event where he would be present but unseen. That evening, as Walter sat by the window watching the golden light fade into dusk, a memory surfaced. His late wife Helen used to tease him about his social obligations. "You don't have to go, you know," she'd say with a smile. "Spend time with people who make your heart feel light, not heavy." Walter stared at the invitation, then something inside him shifted. For the first time in his life, he picked up the phone and declined. No excuses, no guilt, just a simple, firm, "I won't be attending." Instead, he called an old friend he hadn't seen in years, a man who once made him laugh until his stomach hurt. That night, they sat in a quiet cafe, reminiscing about their youth, sharing stories only they remembered, and for the first time in a long while, Walter felt truly present. It wasn't grand. It wasn't an event that would be talked about, but it was real. And in that moment, Walter finally understood his time belonged to him. Walter spent decades saying yes out of obligation, until he finally realized that his happiness mattered. But how many of us still spend time in places we don't want to be, with people who don't bring us joy? Think about it. When was the last time you said yes just to be polite? What would happen if you chose instead to spend your time in ways that truly fulfilled you? Let's talk about it in the comments below. Your experiences matter. 4. Chasing society's beauty standards. The philosopher Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one." The same applies to beauty. Stop chasing it as others define it, and simply embody the grace and wisdom of your years. Lao Tzu, the father of Taoism, taught that nature does not hurry, yet everything is accomplished. A river does not rush to stay young. A tree does not hide its twisted branches. They grow, change, and remain beautiful in their own way. But in today's world where youth is idolized, this wisdom is often forgotten. Let me tell you a story. Eleanor had spent a lifetime battling her reflection. As a young woman, she had been praised for her beauty. Strangers admired her porcelain skin, her raven black hair. People told her, "You'll turn heads wherever you go." She believed that beauty was her strength, her power, so she fought to keep it. Decades passed, and Eleanor did what society demanded. She dyed her hair, bought expensive creams, hid every wrinkle. Each morning she inspected her face, searching for signs of age like an enemy waiting to attack. Then, one evening, she found an old photo album. There she was at 20, bright-eyed and flawless. But as she turned the pages, something struck her. The most beautiful photos were not the ones where she was young and perfect. They were the ones where she was laughing with friends, holding her newborn daughter, dancing in the kitchen with her late husband. For the first time, she saw beauty in the way her mother had looked at her with tired, loving eyes, in the wrinkles of her grandmother's hands as she kneaded bread, in the gray hair of her father as he played with his grandchildren. Eleanor stood in front of the mirror that night, but this time, she didn't search for imperfections. She looked at the woman she had become, the stories in her lines, the love in her eyes, the resilience in her soul. And for the first time, she smiled at her reflection, not to see if she looked young, but because she finally saw herself. The next morning, she threw away the hair dye. Eleanor spent years chasing a version of beauty that wasn't real. How many of us do the same? Have you ever felt pressured to hide the natural signs of aging? What if instead we embraced them? Let's start a conversation. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your wisdom is beautiful. 5. Holding on to activities that no longer fulfill you. The Greek philosopher Heraclitus once said, "No man ever steps in the same river twice, for it is not the same river and he is not the same man." Life is ever-changing, and clinging to old routines that no longer bring us joy only weighs us down. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna teaches, "It is better to live your own destiny imperfectly than to live an imitation of somebody else's life with perfection." We often continue activities out of habit, even when they no longer fulfill us. But true peace comes when we embrace new paths that align with who we are today. Now, let me share a story. For 40 years, Joseph had been a musician. Not just any musician, he was a well-respected violinist in a small orchestra, playing for audiences who admired his skill. Music had been his passion, his life's calling. Every evening he stepped onto the stage, and for a while he felt invincible. But somewhere along the way, the music lost its magic. The rehearsals felt tedious, the performances exhausting. What once filled his soul now drained him. But how could he stop? Everyone still expected him to play. His colleagues, his students, his friends, they all saw him as Joseph the violinist. He feared that if he let go of music, he would let go of himself. One evening, after yet another performance that left him feeling hollow, he walked through the quiet streets and found himself outside a small community garden. He saw an elderly woman tending to roses, humming softly to herself. The peace on her face was something he hadn't felt in years. "Why do you garden?" he asked, more to himself than to her. She smiled. "Because it brings me joy." Joseph hesitated. "What if you loved something once, but now it feels empty?" The woman wiped her hands and looked at him with knowing eyes. Then you stop holding onto it like a lifeline. You let go, so you can make room for something new. That night, Joseph didn't touch his violin. Instead, he sat in silence and listened to the world outside his window, the wind rustling the trees, the distant hum of life moving forward. He thought about what the woman had said. Was he holding on to music out of love or out of fear? The next morning, he packed away his violin. Not forever, but for now. In its place, he picked up something he had abandoned years ago, a set of brushes and an old canvas. As his hands moved with color, he felt something stir inside him. It wasn't music, but it was something real, something that made him feel alive again. Joseph never returned to the orchestra. He still played music, but only when he wanted to, when it felt right. Instead, he painted, he traveled, he found joy in things he had once ignored. And he realized that passion isn't about holding on to what once was. It's about making space for what's yet to come. Joseph spent years trapped by an identity that no longer fulfilled him. Have you ever felt that way? Have you ever held on to something simply because it was familiar? What new passion could be waiting for you just beyond your comfort zone? Let's talk about it in the comments below. Share your thoughts, your experiences. Life is too short to spend time on things that no longer bring us joy. 6. Tolerating toxic relationships. Lao Tzu once said, "Stop leaving and you will arrive. Stop searching and you will see. Stop running away and you will be found." His words remind us that sometimes we hold on to relationships that no longer serve us because we fear solitude more than discomfort. But true peace comes when we surround ourselves with those who bring light, not darkness. The Buddha taught, "An insincere and evil friend is more to be feared than a wild beast. A wild beast may wound your body, but an evil friend will wound your mind." Toxic relationships do not just hurt in the moment, they drain us, manipulate us, and steal our joy. Now let me share a story, one that speaks to the courage of walking away. Evelyn had spent most of her life apologizing for things that weren't her fault. She was the peacemaker, the one who smoothed things over, the one who stayed quiet when her sister belittled her, when her so-called friends only called when they needed something, when her husband, her late husband, dismissed her thoughts as if they were background noise. She had been taught from a young age that love was endurance. That family came first, no matter how they treated you. At 72, she had finally had enough. It happened on an ordinary afternoon. Her younger sister Diane called her, again, not to ask how she was, but to complain, to criticize, to tell her how she was living her life all wrong. It had been the same conversation for years, the same sharp words disguised as concern, but this time, something inside Evelyn snapped. "Diane," she interrupted, her voice steady but firm. "I'm tired." Her sister paused. "Tired of what?" "Tired of this. Of every conversation making me feel small. Of never being good enough in your eyes." A long silence. Then Diane laughed, the same dismissive laugh she had used for decades. "Oh, come on, you're being sensitive again." And that was it. That was the moment Evelyn knew Diane would never change, but she could. She took a deep breath. "I love you, Diane, but I won't do this anymore." Then, for the first time in her life, Evelyn hung up the phone without guilt. That night, she sat on her porch, the sky painted in warm hues of orange and pink. For the first time in years, she felt light, free. She thought of all the time she had spent making space for people who only brought her down, and she promised herself, no more. The next morning she called an old friend, the kind who had always been kind. She made plans to go to the art class she had always wanted to join. She started filling her life with people who made her feel seen, heard, and valued, and she never looked back. Evelyn spent years trapped in toxic relationships, believing it was her duty to endure. But she found peace the moment she chose herself. What about you? Have you ever held on to a relationship that drained you? What finally made you walk away? Let's talk about it in the comments. Your story might help someone find the courage to let go. 7. Comparing yourself to others. The Greek philosopher Epictetus once said, "Wealth consists not in having great possessions, but in having few wants." He believed that happiness does not come from acquiring more but from appreciating what we already have. Buddha also taught that, do not compare yourself with others, for comparison leads to envy, and envy leads to suffering. The moment we measure our worth against another's, we rob ourselves of the joy of simply being. True contentment comes when we stop looking at others' lives and start embracing our own. Now, let me share a story, one that may sound familiar to many of you. Though Richard had spent most of his life looking at what others had, it started when he was young. His best friend Charlie got a brand new bicycle while he had to settle for a second-hand one. Then, as an adult, he saw his colleagues buying bigger houses, fancier cars, taking lavish vacations, things he couldn't afford, no matter how hard he worked. Even when he retired, the habit never left him. He'd sit on his front porch and watch his neighbor Bill, who seemed to have everything: a large family, expensive hobbies, a home filled with laughter. One afternoon, Richard's granddaughter came to visit. As they sat in the backyard, he found himself staring at Bill's perfect lawn, where his grandkids were playing. With a sigh, he muttered, "Some people have all the luck." His granddaughter looked up from her book. "What do you mean?" Richard nodded toward the house next door. "Bill's got a good life, big family, nice things. Makes me wonder if I should have done things differently." His granddaughter furrowed her brow. "Didn't you tell me last week how much you love your quiet mornings, how peaceful your days are?" Richard shrugged. "Sure, but look at him, always surrounded by people. Must be nice." She smiled. "You know, last time I played with Bill's grandkids, they said they wished their grandpa had more time for them. He's always too busy, too caught up in work. And you?" She looked at him with admiration. "You always make time for me. Maybe that's worth more than a big house or fancy vacations." Richard sat in silence, her words settling deep in his heart. He had spent years envying lives he didn't even fully understand. He had overlooked his own joys, the quiet mornings with coffee, the deep conversations, the laughter of his granddaughter. That night, for the first time in years, Richard didn't glance at his neighbor's house. Instead, he took a slow breath, feeling the evening breeze, hearing the rustling leaves. And he smiled. His life was his own, and that was enough. Richard spent years looking at what others had, only to realize he had been rich in ways he never noticed. What about you? Have you ever compared your life to someone else's, only to later see your own blessings more clearly? Let's talk about it in the comments. Your story might help someone else appreciate their own journey. 8. Clinging to outdated goals. The Chinese philosopher Confucius once said, "When it is obvious that the goals cannot be reached, do not adjust the goals, adjust the action steps." This reminds us that clinging to outdated ambitions can prevent us from embracing the present. What once mattered deeply may no longer fit who we've become. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna advises, "You have a right to your work, but never to the fruits of your work." It is a lesson in letting go, not just of attachments, but of the need for past ambitions to continue defining our future. Now, let me share a story, one that might sound familiar to some of you. For most of his life, Charles was a man of ambition. He built his own business from the ground up, spending decades shaping it into something successful. He worked long hours, sacrificed weekends, and took pride in the reputation he had earned. His goal was always clear: expand, earn more, build a legacy. But then life changed. His wife Anna passed away unexpectedly, and for the first time in years, Charles found himself sitting alone at the dinner table, staring at the empty chair across from him. Work didn't fill the silence. Money didn't ease the loneliness. Success, the thing he had chased for so long, suddenly felt hollow. Yet even as the years passed, Charles couldn't bring himself to step away from the business. It was his identity. He told himself that stopping would mean failing, even though the fire inside him had long since dimmed, so he kept pushing, kept striving, until one afternoon his body made the decision for him. A sharp pain in his chest, a rush to the hospital, a doctor's warning, "Slow down, or you won't have many years left." That night Charles sat awake, looking through an old photo album. Pictures of him and Anna traveling, laughing, dancing under the stars. A life he had slowly let slip away while chasing a goal that no longer mattered, and in that moment he knew it was time to let go. At next morning Charles did something that shocked everyone. He walked away. He sold the business, not to expand, but to free himself. Instead of chasing deals, he spent his mornings walking through the park, feeding the birds, reading books he had always put off. He reconnected with old friends, traveled to the places Anna had once dreamed of visiting, and for the first time in decades, he felt something he hadn't even realized he'd lost: peace. Charles spent years clinging to a goal that no longer brought him happiness. How many of us are holding on to dreams that no longer serve us? Have you ever found yourself chasing something, only to realize it wasn't what you truly wanted anymore? Let's talk about it in the comments. Your story might help someone find the courage to let go and embrace the life waiting for them. 9. Feeling guilty for prioritizing your happiness. Lao Tzu once wrote, "When you are content to be simply yourself, and don't compare or compete, everyone will respect you." This reminds us that prioritizing our own happiness is not selfish, it is the foundation of a fulfilling life. Similarly, the Buddha taught, "You, yourself, as much as anybody in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection." We spend our lives giving to others, believing that our worth is tied to sacrifice. But true joy comes when we learn that taking care of ourselves is not neglecting others, it is honoring the life we have been given. Now, let me share a story, one that speaks to the power of reclaiming joy. Margaret had spent her entire life taking care of others. She raised 3 children, stood by her husband through thick and thin, cared for aging parents, and helped neighbors when they needed a hand. She cooked, cleaned, and made sure birthdays were remembered, meals were warm, and everyone else was happy. But somewhere along the way she forgot about herself. At 74, Margaret found herself sitting alone at the kitchen table, staring at a lukewarm cup of tea. The house was quiet now. The children had families of their own, her husband had passed, and the world no longer needed her in the same way it once did. And yet, she still found herself hesitating to do anything just for her. One afternoon, her youngest daughter, Claire, came to visit. She noticed Margaret's bookshelf lined with novels that had never been read. "Mom, why don't you ever take time for yourself?" she asked. Margaret sighed. "I don't know, I suppose I've always been busy looking after everyone else." Claire smiled softly. "But who's looking after you now?" That question lingered. That night, Margaret lay awake, thinking about all the things she had put off, traveling, learning to paint, even just sitting outside with a book. She had told herself for years that it wasn't the right time, that her happiness could wait, but what was she waiting for? The next morning she made a decision. She dusted off a book from the shelf and let herself get lost in the pages. She signed up for a painting class, even though she had never painted a day in her life. And then for the first time in decades, she planned a trip, just for herself. It wasn't easy at first. Guilt crept in. Was she being selfish? But then she remembered something her mother once told her. You cannot pour from an empty cup. Margaret had spent her whole life filling everyone else's cup. Now it was her turn. She boarded a plane to Italy, a place she had always dreamed of seeing. She wandered through museums, ate gelato in the sun, and watched the world move around her, not as someone responsible for everyone else, but as a woman finally claiming the happiness she had always deserved. And for the first time in her life, she felt free. Margaret spent decades putting herself last, only to realize that happiness isn't something to be postponed. What about you? Have you ever felt guilty for doing something just for yourself? What's one thing you've always wanted to do but never allowed yourself to? Let's talk about it in the comments. Your story might inspire someone else to finally put themselves first. As the years pass, we gain the wisdom to understand what truly matters. Life after 70 is not about looking back with regret, but moving forward with freedom. It's about choosing joy over obligation, presence over distraction, and meaning over routine. So let go of what no longer serves you. Embrace the beauty of simplicity. Surround yourself with love, laughter, and the things that bring you peace. If this message speaks to you, subscribe to our channel and share this video with someone who needs it. Let's celebrate this stage of life together, fully, authentically, and with open hearts.